watching him die. He's on the floor of the Shrieking Shack. His throat is torn open. Voldemort has left him there to bleed out alone in the dark, and he has one request, one final act. He pulls you close, and he looks at you with those black eyes, and he says, take them. His memories. He doesn't ask to be saved. He doesn't ask for help. He has been dying slowly for 17 years. He just needs you to see what he carried. You pour them into the pensieve, and then you understand everything. This is the story of Severus Snape, not the story they told you across 6 books, not the villain who swept through corridors like a bad omen, robes billowing, voice cold, eyes that could strip you down to nothing. The real story, the one he kept locked behind walls so thick even Voldemort couldn't find it. Because Snape did something almost impossible. He walked into the darkest place in the wizarding world, into Voldemort's inner circle, and then worked against it. Quietly, without recognition, without thanks. For 20 years and no one knew. Not Dumbledore's army, not the Order of the Phoenix, not Harry, not you. He survived his entire mission by being completely unlovable. He made sure of it, and that is both his greatest achievement and the most devastating thing about him. Let's be honest first. You had every reason to hate him. He walked into that potions classroom on Harry's first day and he humiliated him in front of everyone. He asked questions he knew a first year couldn't answer. He smiled at the silence. He called it instructive. He was cruel in the practiced, effortless way of someone who has been doing it for years and has never been stopped. He favored Slytherin students beyond reason. He turned away when Draco Malfoy targeted people who couldn't defend themselves. He called Hermione an insufferable know-it-all, a girl who did nothing except try harder than anyone else in the room. He told Neville Longbottom to his face that he was one of the worst students he had ever taught. These were 11-year-olds. And it gets darker. There is a memory that lives in a basin in Dumbledore's office, a memory from James Potter's 5th year. Snape is on the ground, levitated by his ankle, robes around his ears, exposed and mocked in front of the entire school. James Potter is laughing. Sirius Black is laughing. Everyone is laughing. The first time you see it, you think, good. You think he deserved it. He became the villain anyway. But that memory doesn't show you what came before it. It doesn't show you where Snape came from. His name before Hogwarts was Severus Snape, and he grew up in a house with no warmth, a father who didn't want to be there, a mother who had forgotten what she was, a witch who had married a muggle and then stopped using magic entirely, as though she was punishing herself for choosing the wrong life. Spinner's End, a mill town, identical terraced houses in a row, a river that ran dark, no friends, no light, just the sounds through the walls at night, and the knowledge from very early on that he was not wanted. He found Lily Evans in a park. She was 9 years old. She could make flowers lift from the ground, and she was not frightened of him. You need to understand how rare that was. She was the first person in Severus Snape's life who did not flinch, who sat down beside him and asked questions and listened to the answers, who said, "Tell me about magic," like it was the most natural thing in the world, like he was worth talking to. For 2 years, he was her friend, genuinely. Completely, and then Hogwarts. He was sorted into Slytherin, she went to Gryffindor, and the rules began to do their work. He fell in with boys who believed blood purity was a fact. Boys who had been raised to understand the wizarding world as a hierarchy, boys who were going to join Voldemort. And Snape, lonely, brilliant, furious at everything that had happened to him, found belonging in their certainty. He was building armor. He just didn't know yet that armor has a cost, that the things you put on to protect yourself can become the things that trap you. 5th year, the worst afternoon of his life. James Potter and Sirius Black cornered him by the lake. They levitated him. They exposed him. They did it because they could, because they were popular and untouchable, and he was neither of those things. And Lily came. She stood between Snape and James Potter. She said, "Leave him alone." And Snape looked at the girl who had been his only friend, the one person who had chosen him when no one else did, the person who was and this is important, this is the only good thing in his life. And he called her a mudblood. He said it out of shame, out of the humiliation of being rescued, out of not knowing any other way to keep his dignity when he had none left. He said the worst possible word to the only person who had ever been kind to him. She walked away. He apologized. That evening, by the portrait hole. He said he was sorry. She looked at him and said, "It's too late." And it was. She married James Potter. She had a son named Harry. And on Halloween night in 1981, she stood in front of her baby and she said, "Not him. Not Harry." And she died. Here's what Snape knew. He knew about the prophecy before she did. He carried it to Voldemort himself. He thought it was leverage. He thought it was a way to make himself indispensable. He did not think when he delivered it about a woman in a house in Godric's Hollow until it was too late. And then he knew that too. This is the part of the story that doesn't get told enough. The morning after Lily died, or as close to morning as it was, Severus Snape went to Albus Dumbledore. Not with excuses, not with justifications. He went and he said, "I told him about the prophecy and now she's dead and I cannot undo it." And Dumbledore looked at him, this broken, guilty man, and said, "Then help me protect her son." So he did. He returned to Voldemort's circle as an informant. He sat at the table of the darkest wizard in history and gave him just enough truth to stay trusted and held back everything that mattered. He fed intelligence to Dumbledore for 2 decades. He kept the mission alive through sheer force of performance because occlumency isn't just blocking thoughts. It's rebuilding yourself every single day into someone unreadable. He taught Harry occlumency. Well, those terrible, brutal lessons Harry resented. He was preparing him. Not gently, not kindly, but he was preparing him. He brewed Wolfsbane potion for Remus Lupin every month without being asked twice. The one thing that kept Lupin from being a danger. He sent the Sword of Gryffindor to Harry in a frozen forest in the dead of winter and then walked away without a word. He watched Harry for 7 years. Every dark moment, every near miss, every time Voldemort's face appeared in the back of someone's skull, let's say Snape was there. In the shadows, holding the line. He never told Harry any of this. He couldn't, because if Voldemort ever leaned into his mind and found warmth where there should have been contempt, it was over. The whole thing was over. Every life he was protecting would be lost. So he stayed cold. He stayed cruel. He let the entire wizarding world believe the worst of him, and they did. If this is landing for you, if you've watched the films 100 times and never quite had words for why Snape's story feels different to all the others, subscribe before we get to the part that changes everything. There is a question at the center of Snape's story that no one talks about honestly. Was Dumbledore kind to him? Think about it. Dumbledore looked at a man destroyed by grief and guilt, a man who had lost the only person he loved, a man who had made a catastrophic mistake at 16 years old, and he said, "Here is your purpose. Here is how you atone." He placed Snape in the most dangerous position imaginable and kept him there for 2 decades. And then and this is the part that should make you stop, he told Snape the truth about Harry only at the end, only when it was too late to change it. "You must keep Harry alive," Dumbledore said, "long enough to die, because Harry is a Horcrux, because Voldemort put a piece of his soul inside Harry as a baby. And for Voldemort to be truly destroyed, that piece has to be destroyed too, which means Harry has to die." Snape had spent 17 years protecting Harry Potter, and the man who asked him to do it had known all along that it ended here. He had the power to tell Snape sooner. He chose not to. Dumbledore looked at Snape at that moment and said nothing he didn't have to. Snape's response, the only response he had left, was 3 syllables after all this time. Always. People want that word to be romantic. They put it on bookmarks and phone cases and say it was the great love story of Harry Potter, but always is not love. It is grief. It is a man who said the wrong word to the wrong person on the worst afternoon of his life and spent the next 30 years paying for it. Who sat at Voldemort's table and did not flinch, who taught a class he hated in a school that reminded him every day of everything he had lost, who looked at Harry Potter's face, James Potter's face, and saw in the eyes someone else entirely, and kept him alive anyway. Not because he was a good man, not because he had earned peace or forgiveness or redemption, because she had sat next to him in a park when he was 9 years old, and she had not been afraid. Snape never asked to be understood. He never left a letter. He never made a speech. His last act was to pull Harry close and give him his memories, not an account, not a confession, but memories. The specific, irreducible, private truth of what he had carried. He gave Harry the only honest version of himself he ever let anyone see, and then he died. In the dark. Alone. On the floor of the Shrieking Shack. His name was cleared eventually. A child was named after him, Albus Severus Potter, and Harry the boy who had hated him, feared him, resented every cold word and every lesson, stood over that child and said, Snape was probably the bravest man I ever knew. Not the kindest, not the most good, the bravest. Because bravery is not the absence of cruelty. It is not the presence of warmth. Bravery is doing what is required when it costs you everything. When there is no reward, when no one is watching, when you do it for someone who will never know. Snape did that. He did it for 30 years, and he never got credit for it because he never looked like the kind of person who deserved any. That was the whole point.